From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Kevin McCarthy faces his first test as Speaker of the House as he tries to pass a rules package on Monday evening based on his deal with Republican rebels that was needed to get the votes to become Speaker early Saturday morning. What are the consequences of that deal going forward? Plus, Joe Biden visits the southern border for the first time of his presidency and then goes to Mexico City for a meeting with the heads of Mexico and Canada. Was that border visit all for show, or could something come out of this that changes policy? Welcome. I'm Paul Gigot with the Wall Street Journal editorial page, and here with my colleagues, Kim Strassel and Kate Batchelder Odell. Welcome to you both. So let's talk first about the fallout from the McCarthy melodrama in the wee hours of Saturday. I stayed up late to watch it, and I think I got my fill of CNN for probably the next decade or two. I had to update the editorial for online readers, so that was my fate in the evening. But, watching CNN was fascinating. You think that this was the equivalent of Preston Brooks caning Charles Sumner on the Senate floor in 1856 with the showdown verbal between Mike Rogers and Matt Gaetz. They both since calmed down and said there's no big deal. I thought, Kim, that Kevin McCarthy did give a fine speech. Now, he said this is going to be good for Republicans because they've learned how to govern. You agree with that?
I do not. That is the hopeful way of looking at it. You've heard a number of Republicans say this. Look, we got out all of our anger and we're past all that, and now we can unite and we figured out how to work together. But you mentioned that the next big test is that they have this rules committee package that they need to vote on, the operating rules of the House. And we already have some moderates who are out there saying they're still not convinced they're going to vote for it, that they think that Kevin McCarthy gave too much away to hardliners in the party. They don't like some of the changes. Tony Gonzalez from Texas and Nancy Mace from South Carolina both told CBS this weekend that they have concerns with it. So we will see if they really have learned how to work together. That will be one big test. There's also a number of elections that are about to be held for prominent positions. We'll see what kind of infighting goes on there as well, too. But I think it's a little bit of wishful thinking, Paul.
When you say elections for prominent positions, you mean this is the steering committee choices for who will run committees and subcommittees, basically?
Correct. And there's sort of four big committees where there are contested seats, and that is meant to roll out today and throughout this week as well, too.
And one of the big changes here is that there'll be 3 members of the Freedom Caucus on the Rules Committee. The Rules Committee being the panel that is usually full of Speaker loyalists because it is the committee that determines what shape the bills that go to the floor. Well, first of all, which bills will go to the floor. Second, what shape they'll be in, what amendments will be in order, and so on. And usually the majority of this magnitude will have 9 seats on rules. The Democratic minority would have 4. So it's stacked for the majority. But if you have 3 Freedom Caucus members and 4 members of the minority, that's 7. That equals a majority over the other 6, assuming that the other 6 would be disagreeing with. You get an issue where conservatives, say on defense spending, Kate, want to agree with the progressives. You could end up with a speaker losing control of that committee.
Right, Paul. And I think it's important to keep in mind the broader context here of what some members in the rebels, if that's what we'd call them, were trying to extract were a return to regular order. And Kim covered these last week in her column. But there are some substantive changes that try to avoid another omnibus of just stuffing everything in an enormous spending bill and ramming it through before anybody's read it. So I think there were some substantive changes there. For instance, reviving Calendar Wednesday, giving committee chairmen more ability to bring bills to the floor, requiring 72 hours before voting on a legislation so everyone can read it, ending proxy voting. So we have long supported a return to regular order that allows committee chairs to do their job. But it is an open question here if the goal is to take hostage the Rules Committee and dictate what the House Armed Services Committee can do. That doesn't look much like a return to regular order.
Let's listen to Jim Jordan, who's, I guess, the spiritual leader of the Freedom Caucus, talking about the concerns that some of us, including us, have raised about the fact that one of the alleged promises made by McCarthy is that the top-line budget number for fiscal 2024, that would be starting in September of 2023 and going for the next year, would be no higher than the number for fiscal 2022. That would imply big, big spending cuts, including for defense. Here's how Jim Jordan responded on Fox News Sunday.
Everything has to be on the table. And frankly, maybe if we would focus our military spending on the soldiers and not having so many the ratio of general officers to enlisted individuals now is so out of whack from where it used to be in our military. Maybe if we'd focus on that, helping the troops who do so much of the work out there for our great country, and maybe focus on getting rid of all the woke policies in our military, we'd have the money we need to make sure our troops get the pay raise they deserve. We have the weapon systems and the training that needs to be done so we're ready to deal with our adversaries around the planet. That's what we want to focus on. So, but you got numbers like that, a $30-some trillion debt and interest payments to service that debt where they're headed this year. You had better look at everything. And frankly, we better look at the money we send to Ukraine as well and say, how can we best spend the money to protect America? I think that's what the people elected us to do. That's what we're going to do.
I have to say, Jim Jordan, I admire his ability to speak so rapidly. He really breaks land speed records every time he gets to the microphone. It's a remarkable talent. What do you make of that soliloquy?
Yeah, it's concerning. And look, if their intention is to look at the size of the general staff, maybe cut some of that, maybe cut some PR jobs, maybe try to reform, wouldn't that be amazing, military health care or pensions, all of which do cost a lot of money. Good luck to them, and they should look at things like that. But this kind of raises the specter of what we have been concerned about. One of these provisions, as you said that spending had to be returned to fiscal 2022 levels. And I've heard a lot of members try to reassure me, don't worry. We didn't commit ourselves to across the board cuts. This isn't going to be, a multi-billion-dollar cut to the military, but that pressure is going to be there to do that. And Jordan just enunciated that kind of pressure, which is going to be to, certainly for a couple of reasons, to suggest to voters that they're not just giving the military a free pass, that they're going to look at it as closely as they do everything else. You heard him also verbalize this concerning element of the Republican Party that wants to cut all aid to Ukraine and spend that money on U.S. domestic concerns. And look, the reality is, too, there's only so much domestic spending you can target before even members of the Republican Party start to become uneasy about some of the programs they might be going after. And all of that is going to increase the pressure to also take the knife to the military at a time when we need to, in fact, be increasing our military spending to deal with increasing world threats.
Kate, what are you hearing on this point from some of your sources on the armed services committees?
Well, I think so far there is not a 5-alarm fire yet. I think there's still some confidence that the committees will be allowed to do their work and make their case.
Is it a 3-alarm fire, a 2-alarm fire? What kind of fire do we have here?
Yeah, I think maybe 3 alarms at this point. I mean, there's definitely concern about everything Kim's describing, because as much as I've written extensively about civil service reform, personnel cost reform, every time I write that the Pentagon shouldn't be running grocery stores, I'm flooded with emails about how sacrosanct the grocery stores are. And so it's not as though there aren't good reforms, and that I think would even make spending increases more credible to the public. So I will be the first to support that effort. But I think it misses just how far behind the power curve we are on defense spending. I mean, we're at about 3% of GDP, and the Cold War norm was closer to 6%. The Navy is 50 ships smaller than what the goal enshrined in law is. It's a significant deficit that we're not going to be able to meet just by reshuffling some of the internal programs at the Pentagon. So I do think, again, too, it just undercuts the whole case that this is about regular order, because the Freedom Caucus doesn't have the votes for even their own goals to cut defense. I mean, Jim Jordan mentioned the woke training programs, which we've written about, but those are questions of culture and priorities and what commanders focus on. There's no money there. So again, I just think this exercise is alarming, but hopefully committee chairs will be empowered to do their work and make the case that it's simply not going to work to live inside 2022 or 2023 levels.
And the point about regular order is that you allow the committees to do their work, the appropriations subcommittees, then go to the appropriations committee, you pass the bills, you work out with Democrats what you're going to pass, what you're going to support, you try to put together a majority, you maybe have to do it only with Republican votes. But here you have the Freedom Caucus saying, well, we're not going to let that work right away. What we're going to do is set a top-line number and dictate it down the chain, right? That's sort of the way things have started here.
Right. I think they are basically saying, well, we're going to hijack the Rules Committee so that we can be in charge of the process. And again, so I think that's where it's worth making some distinctions on members who wanted to extract real substantive changes and who raised some good points about how the House has worked. And then other members, Matt Gaetz from Florida comes to mind, who said on Friday, we're trying to turn the Speaker of the House into a ceremonial position and really be in charge ourselves. I think that was a fairly honest assessment of what the aim was, and that's not going to lead to regular order or a better functioning House.
Yeah, Speaker Gaetz. Okay, all right.